The night had fallen heavy over the Yorkshire coast. Waves crashed against the rocks, roaring like an angry beast, and the wind carried the scent of salt and rain. Eleanor Hargrave stood by the window of Hargrave House, waiting for the faint glow of her husband's lantern to return from the sea. Richard had promised her he would not be long. Yet the hours dragged on, and the storm grew stronger. At midnight, a sharp knock rattled the door. Eleanor hurried to open it, her heart racing. On the threshold stood two fishermen, soaked through, their faces pale and grim. One of them removed his cap, lowering his eyes. "We found his boat," the man said, his voice rough with sorrow. It had broken apart near Blackthorn Cove. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. She clutched the frame of the door, her fingers numb. "And Richard? Where is he?" The fishermen exchanged a glance. Silence hung between them before the second man whispered, "We found his coat tangled in the wreckage. The tide took him, Mrs. Hargrave. I am sorry." The words struck like a blade. Eleanor staggered back, her breath shallow. The house felt unbearably quiet, every tick of the clock louder than thunder. She pressed her hands against her mouth, fighting the scream that burned in her chest. Yet amid her grief, a sliver of unease pierced her thoughts. Richard was a seasoned sailor, cautious and skilled. He would never have gone out in a storm like this. And if he had, why had his boat shattered so completely, as if torn apart by more than the sea? Her sorrow twisted into suspicion. The waves had claimed her husband, or so the village believed. But in Eleanor's heart, she already knew the truth. Someone had wanted Richard Hargrave dead. The news of Richard Hargrave's death spread through the village like fire through dry grass. By morning, neighbors had gathered outside Hargrave House, their whispers drifting like smoke. Some spoke with sympathy, others with suspicion, for Richard had always been a man who inspired both respect and envy. Eleanor moved through the rooms like a shadow, offering polite nods to those who came to give their condolences. Yet she felt every pair of eyes linger on her longer than necessary, as though the villagers weighed her grief, questioning its sincerity. At the market square, she overheard two women talking in hushed tones near the baker's stall. "They say Richard had debts," one muttered, adjusting her shawl. "Debts that could swallow a man whole." The other leaned closer, her voice even lower. "Debts, and a woman in Whitby. I heard she was seen waiting for him." Eleanor's hands tightened around the basket she carried. A woman in Whitby. She forced her steps steady, though her pulse hammered in her ears. That evening, as the candles burned low, Eleanor found herself drawn to Richard's study. It smelled faintly of tobacco and sea salt. Papers lay scattered across the desk, and in the drawer she discovered a leather-bound ledger. Inside, columns of figures stretched across the pages, names, amounts, dates. Her husband's neat handwriting recorded loans, repayments, and missing sums. Her eyes fixed on a line scratched hastily at the bottom of a page. Whitby, Wednesday. The ink was fresh. Richard had been meeting someone in secret. The storm had claimed him, or so everyone believed. But Eleanor now held proof of something else, something dangerous. Before she could examine further, a floorboard creaked behind her. Eleanor spun around, the ledger clutched to her chest. The room was empty, yet the candle flame trembled as if disturbed by a breath of unseen air. And in the silence that followed, she realized she was not alone in the house. The following morning, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, the leather-bound ledger open before her. She traced the figures with her finger, whispering the names as if speaking them aloud might bring clarity. Some of the entries were marked with small crosses, others with ticks. Yet one name appeared again and again, Samuel Blackwood. The surname was familiar. Blackwood owned the shipyard in Whitby, a man known for his wealth and ruthlessness. Richard had often spoken of him with disdain, though Eleanor had never seen them together. Why, then, had Richard recorded his name in the ledger with such urgency? Her thoughts were broken by a knock at the door. Reverend Collins entered, his hat in hand, his eyes soft with pity. "Mrs. Hargrave, the village is holding prayers for your husband this evening. It may bring you comfort." Eleanor forced a smile, thanking him politely, though her mind was elsewhere. She could not speak of the ledger, not yet. She needed to know what Richard had been hiding before the village swallowed the truth in its whispers. That night, while the bells of the church tolled in the distance, Eleanor lit a single lamp and returned to Richard's study. She spread the ledger across the desk and began matching the names to receipts she found bundled with string in the drawer. Most were debts Richard had collected, small amounts from villagers who trusted him. But several pages were missing, torn clean from the binding. Her pulse quickened. Someone had been here before her. Then she saw it. At the bottom of the drawer, beneath the papers, lay an envelope sealed with red wax. The crest pressed into it was unmistakable, the Blackwood emblem. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of parchment. The words leapt from the page, written in Richard's hand. "If I do not return, it will be because of Samuel Blackwood." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Richard had feared for his life. He had known someone was coming for him. Before she could read further, a gust of wind slammed the window open. The lamp sputtered, plunging the room into near darkness. Eleanor scrambled to protect the paper, but when she lifted her eyes, she froze. In the glass of the window, lit faintly by moonlight, a figure stood reflected behind her. Eleanor spun around, her breath sharp in her throat. The room was empty. Only the curtains swayed in the night air. Yet the image she had seen in the window was no trick of the light. Someone had been there. She pressed the letter to her chest and closed the drawer with trembling hands. Gathering her courage, she moved through the house, each step creaking against the wooden floorboards. The silence felt heavy, pressing against her ears. At the front door, she found the latch unhooked. She was certain she had fastened it earlier. Heart pounding, Eleanor stepped outside. The garden lay silver under the moon, the roses glistening with dew. A trail of footprints marked the damp soil, leading towards the gate. They were fresh. She followed them to the lane, but the night was deserted. The wind carried only the distant sound of the sea. Whoever had been there was gone. The next morning, the unease did not lift. At the market, she caught sight of a man she had never seen before. He stood near the blacksmith's forge, watching her with unsettling stillness. Tall, broad-shouldered, his coat buttoned high to his chin. When their eyes met, he tipped his hat slightly before melting into the crowd. Later that day, she confided in her maid, Agnes, who had served the Hargraves since Eleanor's marriage. "Someone was in the house," Eleanor whispered as they stood in the kitchen. "I saw him. And now he follows me in the street." Agnes crossed herself. "That'll be Blackwood's men. They say he keeps eyes everywhere, listening for secrets. Mrs., if Richard wrote that warning, you must be careful. Speaking his name alone is dangerous." Eleanor's grip tightened on the table edge. So it was true. Blackwood's shadow reached even into her home. If Richard had feared him, then perhaps his death had not been an accident at all. That night, unable to rest, Eleanor returned once more to the ledger. By lamplight she turned the pages, tracing Richard's final entries. Her pulse quickened when she reached the last line. "Meet at the pier. Midnight." The words were underlined twice. And as the church bells began to toll outside, Eleanor realized midnight had come. The village slept under a veil of mist, the lamps along the quay glowing faintly through the fog. Eleanor wrapped her shawl tightly about her shoulders and moved silently down the lane towards the harbor. Her heart pounded with every step. She knew she was being reckless, yet the words in Richard's ledger pulled her forward. At the pier, the sea lapped quietly against the wooden posts. The air smelled of tar, fish, and salt. Shadows stretched long across the planks, broken only by the dim light of a single lantern swaying in the breeze. Eleanor paused, straining her ears. A sound carried across the water, the creak of a rope, the faint scrape of boots on wood. She turned sharply. At the far end of the pier, a figure stood waiting. "Who's there?" Eleanor called, her voice trembling. The man stepped forward into the lantern's glow. It was the stranger she had seen at the blacksmith's forge. His dark coat was buttoned to the throat, his eyes glinting like steel. "You should not be here, Mrs. Hargrave," he said, his voice low but clear. "It is not safe for a widow to walk alone at night." Eleanor stiffened. "Did you follow my husband here? Did you see him the night he died?" The man's gaze flickered, but he gave no answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and drew out a folded piece of parchment. "This belonged to him," he said, holding it out. Her hand trembled as she accepted it. The paper was damp, the edges torn. In Richard's handwriting, 3 words stood stark upon the page. "Trust no one." Before Eleanor could question him, a shout rang out across the harbor. Torches flared in the mist, voices rising. The stranger's face hardened. "They've found us," he muttered. "Go home. Now." But even as he spoke, the sound of boots thundered along the planks. Eleanor turned, her breath catching as dark shapes closed in from the fog. And in that instant, she realized she had walked straight into a trap. Torches burned like fiery eyes in the mist as the men closed in. Eleanor's breath quickened. The stranger seized her arm, pulling her into the shadows between 2 stacks of barrels. "Keep silent," he whispered, his grip firm but not cruel. The men's boots thundered on the planks, their voices low and urgent. "Search the pier." She was seen heading this way. Eleanor's pulse hammered in her ears. They were looking for her. Whoever these men were, they had not come by chance. The stranger's warning echoed in her mind, "Trust no one." A torch swept dangerously close. Light spilled across the barrels, shadows shifting. Eleanor held her breath, her nails digging into her palms. One wrong movement, one sharp inhale, and they would be discovered. But the men moved on, their footsteps fading towards the far end of the pier. The stranger released her, though his eyes never softened. "Now you understand. Your husband's death was no storm. Blackwood wanted him silenced. And now he will come for you." Eleanor swallowed hard. "Then why help me?" He hesitated. For the first time, a flicker of something human crossed his face. "Because Richard helped me once. And I owe him a debt." Before she could press him further, the sound of a horn split the night. The men were regrouping, their voices carrying across the quay. The stranger's hand went to the pistol hidden beneath his coat. "You must leave this village," he said. "If you stay, you will not live to see another dawn." Eleanor stared at him, torn between fear and defiance. She thought of the ledger, of Richard's final warning, and of the Blackwood name scrawled again and again. Then she heard it, a cry in the fog, sharp and chilling. "Find the widow." The footsteps returned, faster this time, coming straight towards her hiding place. The stranger's hand pressed firmly against Eleanor's shoulder. "This way," he murmured, guiding her down a narrow passage between the warehouses. They slipped into the darkness, the shouts behind them growing louder. Eleanor stumbled, her skirts catching on a splintered crate. The man yanked her free, his gaze darting to the figures appearing through the fog. Their torches flickered like hunting stars. They moved quickly, weaving through alleys until the sounds of pursuit dulled. At last, they reached the edge of the village, where the looming silhouette of Blackwood Manor rose against the moonlit sky. Eleanor froze. The house seemed alive, its high windows like watchful eyes, its chimneys exhaling smoke into the night. "Why bring me here?" she whispered. "This is his domain." The stranger's jaw tightened. "Precisely. They will never think you bold enough to step into the lion's den. Reluctantly, Eleanor followed him up the overgrown path. The gates stood ajar, their iron teeth twisted with rust. Inside, the manor loomed in silence, as though waiting for them. The doors groaned as they entered. Dust and shadows swallowed the great hall, its portraits staring down with frozen disdain. Eleanor's heart thumped louder with every step. She had stood in this room once before, at a gathering years ago, when Richard was alive. Then, the house had been filled with light and laughter. Now it breathed only menace. The stranger stopped at the base of the grand staircase. He leaned close, his voice barely audible. Somewhere within these walls lies the proof of what Richard discovered. If you find it, you will know why he was killed. Eleanor's throat tightened. The ledger weighed heavy in her satchel, but now a greater truth pressed upon her. Richard had known his end was near. He had left her clues, and they led here, into the very heart of Blackwood's power. A sudden creak echoed above them. Eleanor's eyes shot upwards. A figure moved on the landing, half hidden by shadow. The stranger reached for his pistol. "We are not alone." The figure on the landing descended slowly, the boards creaking beneath their weight. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The flicker of torchlight revealed a face she had not expected, Lady Blackwood herself. The widow's eyes glistened like obsidian, her voice low and unwavering. "You should not have come here, Mrs. Hargrave. Curiosity is a dangerous flaw." The stranger's hand tightened on his pistol, but Lady Blackwood merely lifted a candlestick, her composure unbroken. "If you seek the truth, it will consume you. That is the fate of all who trespass against this house." Eleanor forced her voice to steady. Richard's death was no accident. He knew something. "And I will not rest until I know what it was." For a moment, Lady Blackwood's mask faltered, a shadow of unease crossing her features. Then she turned, gliding up the staircase. "Follow me, if you dare. But once you see, there is no return." Against every instinct, Eleanor climbed after her. The stranger followed close, his eyes sharp with suspicion. They wound through corridors draped in cobwebs, past doors that had not been opened for years. Finally, Lady Blackwood stopped before a panelled wall. With a touch to a hidden latch, the wood groaned open, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom lay a chamber lit by a single lantern. Dust swirled in the stillness. Against one wall stood a desk, its surface cluttered with ledgers, maps, and sealed envelopes. On another hung a tapestry, its threads depicting a ship laden with cargo. Lady Blackwood's voice echoed softly. "This is what Richard found." He thought he could expose it. But he underestimated how deep these roots run. Eleanor approached the desk. Her hand hovered over the nearest ledger, her heart pounding. She flipped it open. The pages revealed shipments of opium, routes stretching across the seas, and names of men in power, judges, constables, even clergy. Her blood ran cold. Richard had uncovered a network vast enough to bind half the county in silence. The stranger's voice broke the stillness. "If this comes to light, it will bring ruin to them all." Before Eleanor could respond, the tapestry shifted. A shadow moved behind it. Someone else was there, hidden in the walls.